Hi, Ross. Welcome to another edition where we're going to be going through a series of questions for the industry. Today, I'd specifically like to cover a series of them. So, welcome back and looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. Let's do
Absolute
this.
pleasure.
I'm interested in
Yes. So, let's jump in here. So, how do I get a cannabis cultivation license in South Africa? This is one I get a lot, and I'm sure you get more than me. So, could you talk us through that?
Yeah, so look, obviously in 2018, when the Constitutional Court ruled that cannabis criminalization acts were unconstitutional, this is where the ground and the framework started moving forward. So obviously now with your Section 22C(1)(b) in terms of the Medicines Related Substances Act, this allows you to cultivate or manufacture cannabinoid or cannabis-containing medicine, and as well as transport, import, and distribute a cannabis-containing medicine. So that's more or less where your Section 22C falls in. So the question is, how do you get your license? How do you get your cannabis cultivation license? Well, you start with an application process. So the application process is through SAHPRA, South African Health Products Regulating Authority. You pay an application fee, and with that, you do your license application, along with a site master file and an organogram, which would be attached to that. So an organogram is basically key responsibilities within your facility. So basically a hierarchy, if you want to call it that way. So what are the reporting structures within your cannabis facility? Where does your site needs to be? It needs to be either on an agricultural holding or an industrial holding. In terms of the application fee, the current fee right now is 25,200 Rand, and that you obviously pay over to SAHPRA. And then they obviously review your site master file along with your license application. So your license application is tied in to your facility. So if your address or a specified location is tied in, that's where your license application will be, and that's the only place it can be. It cannot be at 3 different sites. If it is going to be 3 different sites, then it's 3 different license applications. And obviously you have to go through the whole process again with a new inspection. So what happens is, obviously you do your application fee, you submit your license application, you submit your license, your site master file. Then from there, you should get an acknowledgement letter from SAHPRA to say, thank you, we have received your application, and we are now assigning a CA number. So that CA number is known as your site master file number, and that'll be your process throughout the application, even on day of inspection. That would need to be updated on your site master file as a version 2. And that's what they will review and obviously issue your license. So in dealing with the license, you obviously fall under a few categories. So you've got your good agricultural practice, you've got your good manufacturing practice, good wholesale practice, good laboratory practice, and good distribution practice. So obviously all this ties in, so there's a certain flow that needs to happen throughout your premises. So with your site master file as well, you talk about your basic site plan. What does your site plan look like? How does the flow work? And obviously this allows you to be compliant in terms of SAHPRA's regulations in getting a license. And then you've got your quality management system, which also ties into your license application. Obviously quality is a massive talking point within the cannabis industry, and this is a huge factor in getting your license.
Okay, awesome. Well, you've run through quite a few topics there, and you've touched on some things that I definitely have more questions on, so I'm excited for this. The one thing that we did mention is you get your CA number and all of that. What do the timelines look around? So, I mean, often the guys that I engage with say, okay, what happens? Does someone come out, do a gap analysis of the facility, kind of see, okay, this is a pitfall, that's a pitfall, provide some feedback, and then obviously work with the client on the site master file preparation. And then from, in that process, how long does that typically take? I suppose it's the readiness of the site, but from there to, once you submit your application with your SMF, how long do you wait on SAHPRA? Those kind of timeline questions are kind of important. If you can give us some more insight there.
Yeah, look, so when you start the license application process, you are submitting based on a site. All right, so not necessarily you've started building, you haven't started anything. It's basically just vacant land or a vacant industrial building. So when the timelines come into play, obviously you submit your license application, you then get your acknowledgement letter, and you start the building process. So depending on how fast you guys can build, that's all dependent on how quick SAHPRA can get there to do the inspection. look, on your license application, you'll obviously submit a date on when you think you'll be ready. So say, for example, we started building now and we know we're going to be ready by January 2022. SAHPRA will then notify you and say, look, you've said that you'll be ready in January 2022. Is this the case? Are you ready? Can we come through and do the inspection? If you say yes, then SAHPRA is going to schedule that date and they will come down there. But yeah, it's all relevant to how fast you build at the end of the day. Pre-COVID, they were saying that you could do your license application process to licensing within 6 months. Now, realistically, you're probably looking at between 9 and 15 months, just to be on the safe side. Obviously, weather also counts. It is construction at the end of the day, so there is quite a few variables that come into play. But yeah, on perfect conditions, if you can build the site as quickly as possible, you can inspect an inspection within the next 8 months.
Okay, excellent. And then I'm going to stick on timelines here. Let's say you have an inspection that's successful. There's a positive resolution and a license window. How do those timelines look?
Look, so generally SAHPRA issues a response. So you get a response to your inspection. So a response generally takes 30 days. It could take a little bit longer. Depends on a few things as well. So there's two ways you can get this. Either you get a resolution immediately. So, well, not immediately on site, but they'll say, right, we haven't found any deficiencies with your site in the closing meeting, so we will send you our report in the next 30 days. So you're either going to get a deficiency report, which will list what was wrong with the site, but you'll know within the meeting if you did have any deficiencies that you needed to fix. So obviously it gives you time within those 30 days waiting on the response that you guys can obviously fix what needs to be amended, and then send through proof to the relevant inspectors that were at your site. In a good case scenario, obviously they say in the closing meeting, look guys, we haven't found any discrepancies or any deficiencies, so we will then be issuing your resolution in the next 30 days. In the term that there's a response, it would take 30 days, then you would have 30 days to respond to SAHPRA, then SAHPRA would then have 30 days to respond to that response. That's where it can be quite timely and lengthy.
Okay, perfect. I understand that. So, no, that's a good one. It covers that in detail. So, the next big question I had for you, and this often comes up, is, guys see the requirements for preparation of a site master file, and they often feel like, okay, well, if it tells me I need to prepare the following documents to be submitted along with my application, it's something I feel I can handle or tackle. But invariably, when they get started with the site master file, it starts to become a little like, oof, what do I put down here and what do I say over here? And okay, maybe I need to refer to a quality manual, and does it need to be 30 pages for the submission? And, all these type of questions. Can you talk us maybe through, what is it really that is trying to be assessed through the site master file? Obviously, SAHPRA wants to use it as a document to facilitate the audit. And what are the highlights, the most important things, and why is it important to have assistance when you're looking to obviously put a site master file together?
Yeah, look, site master file it's a document that's prepared by the cultivation site, all right, as well as pharmaceutical. But let's talk about cannabis because that's what we're speaking about. So it's a document prepared by the cultivation site, and it touches on specific information and factual information about the site. So what operations will be carried out? What are your procedures, your processes? What is your quality policy? Those are all different things that tie into your site master file. So then you've also got other activities on site. Your location, where is the location? What's your GPS coordinates? Who are the authorized persons that are going to be involved in the site? So what a lot of people don't know as well is you've got key factors within an organization. So you've got your authorized representative, you've got your deputy authorized representative, you've got your cultivation manager, your processing manager, your quality assurance manager. So there's a lot of different roles that fall into the site master file as well. And it also gives SAHPRA a brief on what your future role within the site's going to be. So it's not just a matter of what's happening now, it's also your intended purposes in the future. But yeah, I mean, it also talks about size of buildings. So how big is your cultivation space? How big is your processing area? So processing obviously being your drying, curing, weighing, packing, and then obviously your receiving and dispatch areas. How old are the buildings? How long have they been there? Have you newly built this facility? Is it an old existing building that's been there for 20 years that now you have to revamp? This is all things that tie into your site master file. Then you've got your number of employees. So how many people are going to be working at your site? Or eventually, how many people are going to be working at your site? What is your quality policy? Are you doing self-inspection audits? Are you doing external audits based on people that are supplying you? Assessing suppliers that are supplying you. Your organogram. So your organogram, like I just said, key personnel within a facility, how the hierarchy works, CEO, authorized representative, deputy authorized representative, cultivation manager. Then you've got all your cultivation staff. Then you've got your quality assurance manager. Then you've got the different roles that they take as well. Qualifications. So what type of qualifications do the personnel have on site? Do they have a business background? Do they have a cannabis background? Do they have a pharmaceutical background? This doesn't necessarily hinder any chances within you getting your cultivation license, but SAHPRA just wants to know who the people are and what are their background that are entering this space. Then how are you going to train your staff? What is your training policy? How does your training get rolled out? Are you going to send them out for fire courses, for CPR training, for first aid training, for health and safety in general? Are you going to employ a SHE-rep, so safety health representative? Then what are your health requirements in terms of cultivation as well as production or processing? Do they have to wear PPE? What PPE are you going to be issuing? So this all ties into your site master files. So all it is, it's a specific and factual information about the site and where it's going to go and what are you doing. Also, another thing that ties into this is your site plans. How does your site look? How does your process flow look? What are your environmental controls? What is your calibration? So in terms of scales, in terms of pH meters, stability testing. What is your procedure for rejected goods, recall? So obviously if you're in the pharmaceutical background, you'll have more of an input on these rejected goods and procedure for recall.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, that's a good rundown. I like that. I mean, it's always difficult, the envisioned cannabis cultivation site SMF versus what would typically be a traditional pharmaceutical site master file, where sometimes it can be very specific, very factual about, okay, we have this RO system, we have this HEPA qualification of the air handling units, we've got these grades and ISO environments in the building. So, usually when you look at a SMF or site master file from a pharmaceutical perspective, it can be very specific, and sometimes it's one where you kind of making a guesstimate about what will happen on site, but it has to be factual and accurate. And I think that's really the intent of the site master file, is to gear the auditor in terms of the actual auditing of that facility, so that they know what to look for. Like if you've got good service level agreements in there, they know, okay, these are the type of service level agreements we would expect across all cannabis cultivators, because they all need third-party testing assurance for the most part. So those are the kind of things that it's good to see you mentioning there. And I mean, that's often the tip of the iceberg. The next question I have for you is really geared towards, we mentioned site master file, but, the SOPs, like, sometimes individuals might feel that they can get their hands around a 30, 40 page site master file. Okay, I can do that. But they tend to, that's like the tip of the iceberg often, because when we look at things like the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, the quality manuals, the validation master plans, talk us through, maybe by listing for the SOPs, like how many SOPs are typically seen in these submissions or need to be on standby, and also the nature of these SOPs, because I think very often this is an overlooked aspect in terms of quality manuals and SOPs, and it's something that often individuals feel like, yeah, it's just what I do on site, I'll write it all down. But when you go to writing it down and you need to fill this out, it starts to become quite a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, an SOP or standard operating procedure is a procedure that you want to be followed. So let's say, for example, the authorized representative has a set of tasks that he wants done in each specific area. So drying, curing, trimming, weighing, packing, cultivation area, cloning, mother room. Now, instead of him running around every single morning and every single afternoon telling people or delegating what he wants done, what you do is you actually put this into a standard operating procedure. So that obviously gives an outline of each area on what needs to happen for the staff. And it also helps with training. So typically there's probably about 90 SOPs that go to a site. It's over 2,000 pages of documentation. So if you're planning on writing these yourself, it's probably going to take you close on a year to get all of that done. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of input. It's a lot of research. I I mean, I've written a few SOPs for the cannabis industry, and the amount of research that goes into it actually becomes quite daunting, to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, if you're going to jump on with a compliance expert, rather go that way. Yes, it's a lot of money to apply, but at the end of the day, you are probably going to receive your resolution based on their experience. And I mean, for that, money can't really buy that. So, yeah, that's what I would suggest. And then in terms of quality, well, let's actually go back to the standard operating procedures. So your quality manual and your validation master plan is a standard operating procedure. So a lot of people don't know that as well. So that would fall into like facility and product handling, for example. Then you've got security. So how's your security going to work? What is your visitor access control? What is your distribution access control? So how do you allow suppliers to come in? How do you allow your product to go out? So these are all different things that talk to each other as well. Then you've got your document handling. What is your procedures for document handling? What is your retention period on documents? So how long do you keep your documentation for? Generally, it's 5 years. So now, in terms of your site plan, you're going to need a document storage area. So these are a lot of things that people don't look at. Then you've also got your cultivation. So now you need cultivation SOPs. Okay, so hold on. And now I'm doing mother, cloning, vegging, flowering. Those are all different procedures as well. Then you've got your different temperature and humidity parameters. So now you need another SOP based on temperature and humidity. Then, right, how do we do that? Well, now we need to do mapping because now we need to figure out where our hot spots and our cold spots are. So that's another SOP. So you see how everything starts linking and talking to each other. That's basically what a quality management system is. But it's a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look at it as well from the perspective, I mean, often, people talk about a compliance mindset and culture. And, basically, it's really important to understand when you're producing a product that is, going to go into the pharmaceutical environment as an API that ultimately will go into finished goods, you need to identify risk in the process. What can go wrong? Where did it go wrong? Can we prevent that in the future? And this is often why SOPs are there. It's a very obvious thing. It's almost like a checklist. Every pilot has their checklist. A good surgeon will also have a checklist when they go into the operating room that we need this checked. We need to check on the anesthetics. We need to check on the band-aids and the stitches so that when you get into stress in the actual operation, you're ready. You've run through it. You've done rehearsals. All of this is never overlooked and should not be overlooked when we talk about quality, because it's very difficult to break quality if you do quality by design and you lay out SOPs and you've got a good facility. So, I mean, this is something that might feel laborious to many, and it often is in the preparation. But I imagine the one thing you guys do as well is you don't just say, here's a cut, dry SOP pack. It really comes down to the need to tailor that to what is happening on site in the facility.
Yeah, especially when it comes to a quality manual and your validation master plan. I mean, to give you an example of a quality manual, so it's an overview of your business as well, similar to your site master file, just a lot more shorter and briefer. Then you've got your key personnel that will be working on site, your documentation requirements, your management commitment. So what is their commitment to your quality policy? You've got your customer focus. So how are you going to be focusing on your customers or your offtake agreements? Then you've got your quality policy, and all of this ties in with all your standard operating procedures. Then you've got your validation master plan. Now, your validation master plan is a lot more in-depth because this is where you validate the process. So you've got your installation qualification, your operational qualification, your performance qualification. So people are probably sitting there looking at me like, oh, geez, what is all of this? Well, let's put it this way. So now we're going to put an aircon in, all right? So how did you install that aircon? How do you validate that aircon is operating at an optimal range? Then how do you validate that process? So now you've got your performance qualification. So how is the airflow throughout the entire facility? And these are all little things. I mean, aircons, yeah, you can have them in a facility. It's known as good agricultural practice. You will still get a resolution based on this. But then you've got your level up, which is your good manufacturing practice. Then you start talking about HVAC systems. Then you need to know differential pressure, dynamic pressure, DOP testing. What is your air changes per room? So this will also be part of your installation qualification, operational qualification, performance qualification, reverse osmosis, same situation. But anyway, let's go back to validation master plan. So now, like you touched on, we've got our risk management. So how do we mitigate the risk? Is there a risk in this specific area? If so, okay, let's use our risk priority number. Let's go and investigate how we can reduce or mitigate our risk in this specific area. Then you've got your equipment. How do you validate the equipment that you use? So we've got pruning scissors or scales. Okay, so scales, pretty easy. We bought them from a scale manufacturer. We now need a calibration certificate. So that calibration certificate talks to the scale that says it's been calibrated and it weighs at this according parameter. And that obviously needs to be done once a year. Then you've got processes that need to be validated. So processes, standard operating procedures, same example, it is a process, it needs to be validated at the same time. Then you've got your documentation, and then you've got your validation schedule. When do you validate things? How often do you validate it? Pest control, security, this all falls into your validation.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, one of the things you mentioned there was obviously the validation of the air quality, how it's installed, how it's operating. I mean, there are simple things. When we talk about a GMP environment, you get things like a particle air sampler, where you'll sample a square meter of air, for instance, and or cubic meter of air, sorry. And then from that, you will expect a certain amount of particulates based on that quality or grade of the room. So if you've got your different ISO or class rooms, it needs to conform to a specification. And then it goes up the value chain ultimately, even when you go to something like a sterile room or close to a higher class room. So, I mean, these are things that, yeah, are absolutely vital. Yeah, it's one thing to say, okay, we do things this way, we maintain things this way, we put on PPE, but you've got to validate that what you're doing works. And I mean, that's where all these additional tests need to come in and the quality assurance to your quality control parameters. So I'm going to jump ahead to our next question as well, yeah. And I mean, we've touched on it here briefly, but the validation of the air and the water in the facility is almost, for me, in any pharmaceutical environment, in any good manufacturing environment, the quality of the air and the quality of the water is paramount. If you don't get that right from the onset, you're just waiting to deal with breaches of containment, outbreaks of microorganisms. You know, getting good air and water quality is ultimately the safest way you can play it. What are your views in the cultivation of cannabis space when it comes to air and water quality?
Well, look, water is a critical finding. So, I mean, if you don't have a valid water test that falls under drinking standard SANUS 241, pretty much it's going to be known as a deficiency. And the only way to get this type of standard is through reverse osmosis. So reverse osmosis system, you can get them cheap. You can also get them expensive. I've seen some reverse osmosis systems going for over 300,000 Rand. But yeah, what this does is it obviously controls the microbes, it controls the heavy metals, your pH balance, that sort of thing. Look, I know with some cultivation experts, the guys don't want reverse osmosis because they say that it takes a lot of the minerals out of the water. But at the end of the day, you've also got minerals that can be added to the water solution as well. So in terms of quality, obviously you don't want microbes in water. You're going to be putting this into a plant that needs to go to a medicinal market. So if any traces of heavy metals or any traces of microbes pick up, it's automatically going to be a rejected goods for destruction, and that whole batch is going to have to be destroyed. And that's where your SLA talks to that as well. So look, in terms of water, that is a critical finding. In terms of air handling, like I said, you've got your good agricultural practice, you've got your good manufacturing practice. So under good agricultural practice, you can use air cons to maintain the cold chain in a room. You can also use dehumidifiers to obviously regulate the humidity. And when it comes to GMP, then obviously you're going to need your HVAC systems, you're going to need your pressure cascades, you're going to need your magnehelic gauges to validate that you've got specified pressure in each room. Is the pressure dropping? Is the pressure increasing? So when I open this door, the pressure on the gauge should automatically drop. When I close it, that pressure needs to go back up to the pressure design. So yeah, in terms of a GMP site, yes, air is extremely important. In terms of good agricultural practice, look, as long as you are keeping anything from coming into that facility, so in terms of cross-contamination, then you're also fine. So what you would then need to do is you need to have little segmented areas. So for example, you'll enter the building from the outside, you'll then come into a room that's generally a cleanish area, and then you'll have another door as well. So generally any contamination will stay within that area and you'll then move to the next step. But yeah, like I said, GMP must is HVAC. I mean, with there, you're going to need to check your dynamic pressure, differential pressure, HEPA filtration, extremely important. Non-viable particle counts, airflow velocity. So this is where the installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification comes in. Number of air changes. How many air changes have been 45, 105? I mean, what scope? At the end of the day, you've also got your ISO 8 grade D. So there's obviously specifications that you need to fall into in order to get to those parameters as well. And that's where your HVAC system comes in as well.
Yeah,
in the event that there's a power failure, what is your recovery time?
That's true. I mean, for me, here's a big one because, I mean, we've talked about GACP versus GMP for air handling alone and how big the difference is. And this also makes me think of recent publications that come out about we're going to have GMP standards for cultivation and we're going to have GACP no longer being the norm or the standard. You know, I mean, these are big, massive decisions because, you know, to change from a GACP cultivation workflow to GMP one is a completely new facility in essence when we look at that. So, you know, it's really important I'm glad you brought up the GMP versus the GACP with the pressure cascades and all the other considerations because it's not just an easy switch. You know, it's one where it has to be QBD, quality by design, that these facilities are built to spec for that application, and there needs to be that consistency in terms of how it's perceived from a regulatory standpoint so that we all agree that, okay, for GACP, this is the norm, for GMP, this is the norm, and we know what we're building to. So thanks for bringing that up because increasingly this qualification of the air and the water, it really is specific to what the outcome is for that facility. And I think you've done a good job of covering, you know, what to consider from the air quality, what to consider from the water quality, and just to remember that you need to know what you're building for. So if you're building for GACP and you're building for GMP, there are those two different parameters and standards you've got to kind of spec to. And if you're keeping to those specs, just be cognizant of what's required to validate the different environments. And I think you've done a great job of covering that. I'd like to go to, this is the big question for me, and this comes up very often, is I always like to have this discussion with individuals like yourself that are regularly on audit days with SAHPRA, with clients coming through, you know, what are the questions on the day of the audit? Is really, because I think this is also a good way to know, like, oh, wow, there's a lot more for me to prepare and know that I need expertise and help in the preparation. What do you see as some of the surprising questions or some of the obvious ones that guys overlook and they come up often on the day of the audit?
Look, yeah, so I've been in a few inspections now. You know, but also it varies from inspector to inspector. So obviously inspectors come out in pairs. So you'll get one pair that'll go a completely different route, and you'll get another pair that goes like the normal route. So look, in terms of a normal inspection, they are going to dissect your SOPs. They're going to want to see what your security is. How do you validate those processes? What is your standard operating procedure for visitor control? What is your standard operating procedure for your electronic computer systems? Then you've got SLAs, so service level agreements. Who is your security contractor? Who is your video camera system set up with? Do you have off-site storage? Water it's a critical thing. Water, I mean, if there's no service level agreement with the water lab and there's no test in terms of drinking standards accreditation 241, that will be a critical finding. And it is asked in pretty much all the inspections. So water, definitely, you need to have it. And then they'll touch on other things. So then you've got your transport. Who does your transport for? Where is it going? Does it go to OR Tambo? Does it go straight to the client? Where does it go? How does it get there? Does it have cold chain management? Is the temperature and humidity control? These are all questions that you'll need to know. Then your site master file. A simple question. Is this an up-to-date version site master file? No. We started this months ago. Okay, but I'm here for inspection now. Why is this not an updated version with your updated plans? You've built your facility, you've got your updated plans. Where's your pest control? Where's your security surveillance lab? Where's your emergency evacuation lab? Do you have a facility master plan? Do you have fire extinguishers? Okay, where's your service level agreement? Then you'll go into a completely different inspection and they won't even touch on anything. They'll touch on your quality manual. They'll touch on your validation master plan. They'll touch on your business plan. Do you have a service level agreement for status labels Are you doing your own status levels in-house? If so, does your standard operating procedure talk to that? So does it say that you're doing your own labels or that you're outsourcing? So these are all questions that come in, and it pretty much falls into your site master file a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, these are the questions that need to be asked. I mean, what is your cultivation process? How do you validate it? Come, let's go do a walkthrough. Show me how you validate your cultivation. Let's see your process flow. How does your staff move? How does your product move? Because at the end of the day, this also mitigates your risk in terms of cross-contamination. Because if your personnel are moving in a different way and your product's moving in a different way, that mitigates your risk. Whereas if your people are moving with your product, that increases your risk. So these are all things that SAHPRA looks for in an inspection. And obviously knowledge. They just want to make sure that you guys are knowledgeable, that you show appreciation that they're there. They understand you spent a lot of money. They understand that you've gone through a lot to get your site ready. They want you to be excited to have it. They want you to be excited that they're there, that they get to inspect your site. They're not there to tear you down or break you down. They're there to ensure that you know what you're talking about. At the end of the day, it is a medicinal product. It's an active pharmaceutical ingredient. They want to know that it is safe and it has efficacy. That is it.
Yeah.
And the quality.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, you mentioned, validating the cultivation. How do you go about that? Do you use tomatoes to validate? What is the procedure around validation? Because obviously you need your license to be able to touch the seeds and the clones that go into the facility. So talk me through that process of validation.
Yeah, correct. So look, generally you'll have tomatoes or chilies. A lot of the guys put tomatoes in because the cultivation standard or techniques that they use are generally very similar to a cannabis plant. So they know if they're using cocoa peat or cocoa coir or vermiculite, that generally if they can get their tomatoes up in their mother room, for example, they know it's going to work with their cannabis plants. So they'll come in and see that there's tomatoes on the site growing. And that allows them to validate. It also allows the cultivation person to validate it. Right, guys, check, this is the soil compound I use. This is how my drip irrigation system works. Or this is how my hydroponic system works, or my aeroponics, or my aquaponics. So it just gives them a general indication of how you're going to be growing. And obviously with tomatoes being up there, I mean, if you've got ripe fruit on those tomatoes, I mean, the inspectors are going to be impressed.
Yeah, 100%. Also, it alludes to these, going through that process, it alludes to things like your fertigation and nutrient handling, SOPs, your cultivation, your transfer from this room to that room, if you're vegging, flowering. I mean, that's kind of like just being prepared for the whole workflow. It's almost like on the day of inspection, you need to be as horizontally covering the entire scope, but willing to go down all those verticals as required by the regulator to just quality check that you in fact have thought through the process, have spent the hundreds and thousands of hours ahead of the time, kind of making sure that you're mitigating the risk in the manufacturing process and the cultivation process. So, I mean, do you often see that there's a need as well for them? I mean, things I know that are required is, you have to have your screens up, your recording slides, security, you need to have pharmacists on site with you as well, and it has to be the pharmacist that's listed in the site master file, is that correct?
Yeah, so you obviously have a responsible pharmacist or a pharmacist that's allocated to that site. This is becoming a big factor right now with SAHPRA, that there is a pharmacist on site, because obviously they need to sign off in terms of scheduled substances. So obviously the THC being a Schedule 6 now, and CBD being a Schedule 4, you've obviously got a Schedule 6 register. Now, generally, most CBD products also contain THC, so generally it would be a Schedule 6 product. So the pharmacist needs to sign off of that. Same as your destruction house. So your pharmacist will sign out that the product's going out through your Schedule 6 register, and then it's being received at the destruction house where a pharmacist will sign off that they are destroying that product at the same time. So pharmacist is a massive thing as well. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
No, perfect. And do they also, in terms of the construction, because I mean, this is maybe less pertinent to GACP and more for GMP, like, the quality of the epoxy. Do they need to see, how thick was the layer, what grade was used? Does that come up as well, or is that one that's just usually assumed?
Look, construction finishes are generally listed in your site master file. So under GACP, you would go for screed concrete. You'd go for polystyrene panels. Whereas under GMP, you'd go for polyurethane paneling and you'd go for epoxy 4mm. Yeah. Then you'd also have your ducktails on the ISO paneling. So obviously that allows you to have a curved surface so it's easy to sanitize. So look, it's like night and day with GAP versus GMP. To get to a GAP license, minimal budget. I mean, you could probably get away with about 5,000 rand a square meter. GMP, minimum 25 to 35,000 rand a square meter. So it all depends where you want to go and how you want to position yourself.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is something that SAHPRA is also reviewing now, is obviously GACP versus GMP as well. So we'll know more around those guidelines probably in the next 6 months, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you've covered a lot there. I mean, everything, even nowadays, needing your COVID protocols and SOPs included. It's constantly.
Yeah, COVID's big, eh? I was actually sitting in inspection the other day, and that was one of the SOPs that I ended up writing literally as COVID hit. And I literally had to go and just suss out how I'm going to get this process done and how I'm going to implement this and where the signage needs to go. What do I need to do? Do they need to have hand wash stations inside the facility? Do they need to be sanitized? Pretty much, yes, everywhere. And COVID's a big aspect because obviously it's now law. So you need to have these things in place in order to pass your inspection because it is part of the law.
Yep, 100%. I mean, the one other thing that I can think of is, that need for all the SOPs to be effectively written in and made effective, valid by the time you do your audits. These are things that are often overlooked, as it's like, oh, we've had them, we've not touched them in a while. When was the staff last trained on the SOP handling, and are they being tested for it? So I mean, Ross, thank you so much. I think we've covered so much today in terms of the type of questions we'd often see. I know that we've tackled a couple things throughout the value chain, so I want to just say thank you for your time, bringing in that clarification. I've included your contact details as well on this deck so that anyone who's interested in asking questions about, okay, what do I need to do? Is this something I can tackle? What's the difference between the GACP and the GMP? Yes, we're waiting for regulatory feedback, but it's one where you can get an indication based on experience in those different fields. And all I can say is thank you once again for having you on. We always have good technical discussions because I need ultimately your cultivators to be successful so that I can assist them more on the future extraction projects that they'll be more closely involved with and the respective testing. So Ross, big thank you. Thank you for being on and really enjoyed your company today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. And guys, if you want to give me a shot, please get a hold of me. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I'm more than willing to assist you guys.
Perfect.